These days, V8s are an endangered species, which is what makes this car so special. I'm Nima from MVL Leasing, and this is a 2023 Ferrari F8 Spider. So this Ferrari F8, the color is called Grigio Silverstone. A lot of these sports cars, they take the name of the color for them from famous racetracks around the world. In this case, Silverstone Raceway in the UK. The color is like a dark cloud because it's always raining in the UK, so I think it kind of fits. With this particular car, was introduced in 2020 and they made it up until 2023. Now the chassis is actually the same chassis that you find in a Ferrari 458, which was introduced in 2010. It was revised for 2016 into what we know today as the 488 GTB, and this is kind of the last hurrah when it comes to that chassis. This chassis was introduced in 2010 for the Ferrari 458. They carried it over to the refresh to the 488 GTB, which was a big problem at the time because everybody loved that naturally aspirated V8. A lot of horsepower per liter, no turbos, no electric, just all car. The 488 introduced Ferrari's next step when it comes to combustion engines, and that was the 3.9 liter V8. But even though they kind of did away with some displacement and added a bit of turbos, the power leap from one to the next was huge. You went from 563 horsepower to 661. The 488 Pista was the most potent version of that car, with the engine tuned from 661 to 710 horsepower. But when you get with that car, you're spending a lot of money. The value has gone up a lot because they're made in such limited numbers. The good thing about the F8 is because it retained that engine and general powertrain, put it into far more updated bodywork that gives you a glimpse of Ferrari's future design language, which kind of ended with this car, which was replaced by the 296 GTB, which is hotly debated as not that great a car only because it's a V6. It's more powerful than this. It's got over 800 horsepower, but it's just missing those two cylinders, which a lot of people have fallen in love with. So if you want to have one of the last production V8 Ferraris, this would be the one. Okay, so let me go into a few of the important design elements of the front end of this car. So the headlights are extremely slitty. This air dam here, which actually feeds your brake ducts and your wheel well liners, are actually almost integrated into the headlight. So it's almost got a shape of a letter J. These big air dams have big radiators in them. Remember, turbocharged cars run on average about 60 degrees hotter Fahrenheit over a naturally aspirated engine, so you need all the cooling that you can get. The way that you can fit bigger radiators in openings that are just this big is by taking radiators, rather than having them upright, just kind of laying them down like this so you can increase the size of the radiator. There's two in there and two on the other side too. One cool thing about the Ferrari F8 that is something that you would normally only get in a performance version like the Pista is this front air scoop here. So what happens is the car takes in air through here and it expels it out the hood like that. This helps to keep the front end more planted. Again, this was something that you only saw in something like a Pista, standard feature on the F8. Really nice stuff. Okay, let's take a quick look in the front. I'm just gonna open this up. This is all aluminum, very light. So here you can actually see where the air is channeled from this front air scoop here. So it actually comes through here and then goes through here and gives you that downforce I was talking about. A nice carpet in here. You have your original Ferrari car cover. This is where you keep your trickle charger. That's your puncture kit. And this is a tool kit. Never seen a guy who owns a Ferrari whip that tool kit out. Every time I've seen one, they've never even been touched. Starting in 2016, Ferrari did a really nice thing where they have these plaques that are situated depending on the car. In this case, the frunk. This is nice and engraved, and it tells you exactly all the options that whoever had spec'd this car had picked. Now, anytime that we stock in a car like this and I list all the factory options, I take it right off of this because this is gospel. This is very important in trying to determine what equipment the Ferrari has, the options that were picked, ones that were overlooked, things like that. Now here we're looking at the front wheel of this Ferrari. Now this is an upgrade twisted forged wheel that you can get with the F8. There's another wheel that's a standard 5-spoke, which is kind of the free wheel that you get with the car. Carbon ceramic braking system is standard. Whoever spec'd this chose for the calipers, these huge 6-piston calipers, to be painted yellow, which is nice because it kind of matches the Ferrari stamp in the fender. This is also a very important option. It's a few grand and it's actually stamped into the fender. It's not just a sticker and it's not just a badge that adheres on with a sticker. This fender is actually stamped, kind of a really nice touch. This car also has a front axle lift, which is kind of important. The front axle lift is really good at relieving the stress of traversing driveways that look a bit iffy because you don't want to scratch that front bumper. You can have these splitters. These ones are just made of plastic, but you can also have those made of carbon fiber. They're a few $1,000s to replace each. These ones aren't cheap either, but in any case, I don't want to scratch my Ferrari. So if I have a front lift kit, it really helps. So let's go down to the door here. These are really nice mirrors that are aerodynamic and they're also foldable, power folding. So it really helps when you're parked because this does almost add another 6" each side to the car's width. So even if you were to knock this loose, again, very expensive to replace. These door handles are even designed in a very aerodynamic manner. At speed, they provide about 50 pounds of downforce. I'm just kidding, but you believe me. These vents here feed heat exchangers. So you have one on each side. This is all to help keep the engine cool. When we come back here to the rear wheel, you have the same carbon ceramic braking system. This is a 4-piston setup with the electric parking brake provided by Brembo. You have 305 tires back here, 20-inch rims that lay down a lot of power, or lay down a lot of rubber, which you need in order to transmit that power to the road properly. This is a really important part of the car because it marks Ferrari's return to the double pot tail lights. From 2010 with the introduction of the California and the 458, and later with the F12 and the FF, they all became single lights. This was a big change for Ferrari because a lot of the generations that precede these cars were all with the double pot. So this marks the return to that. The F12 was replaced with the Superfast. They returned back to this. All the Ferraris are going back to this classic look. It's really nice. You have these vents here that are actually integrated into the bodywork. Again, this is for those heat exchangers because you need space behind those heat exchangers for air to escape and go through the heat exchanger and be expelled. Without that, it renders the heat exchanger useless. So that's part of the job of these guys here. One nice feature is the exhaust. Now you can get these in this finish and you can get them in a matte black finish and I think gloss black as well. Car sounds really good. We're gonna do a sound test in a bit. You got the rear parking camera, which is really useful because these fins that come down don't only look beautiful, but they perform a function. They channel air from underneath the car and expel it away in order to create downforce, helps the rear end suck to the ground. Underneath the car is completely flat. Any Ferrari you see underneath, if you ever want to get at anything, there's an array of panels you got to remove in order to access any component under there, all for aerodynamics. The Cavallino, which is the Italian way of referencing the prancing horse, is on the bumper here. These things I know because we've wrapped a couple of these cars with paint protection film and these are very difficult to remove, only because you have to remove the bumper and get in behind and undo the screws in order to pluck this off. I think this was done A, for quality, and B, to make it very hard to steal, which is, you know, a really good idea. The exhaust is active. So there's butterfly valves in there that kind of actuate open and closed to make the exhaust loud or a little bit more well-mannered. Now, the only time that they open is under a couple different circumstances. One is over wide open throttle. If you have your foot to the floor, they'll open up. And two is if you cross around 4,000 RPM, they kind of open up. A lot of guys blow their brains out getting exhausts for this car because they think it's a little too quiet, which is just comes with a turbocharged engine. The exhausts are generally more quiet than naturally aspirated cars for a number of reasons. For some reason in these cars, you can't have manual control over these butterfly valves in the exhaust. But you can get these modules that basically let you choose when you want them open and when you want them closed. So even when you have them open on a cold start, yeah, the car is loud, but I would say it's still very tolerable and still sounds really nice and a heck of a lot cheaper than getting like a Capristo or anything like that. Any of my clients that want to get an aftermarket exhaust for their Ferrari, I always encourage them to try this cost-cutting measure first, because if they just want a bit of bark, you don't have to go and spend 5 digits in order to do that. Okay, a lot of vents back here on top of the engine. So you have these fins here that show these grills that you can see the engine underneath. This helps dispel heat. These vents here actually feed intakes. So the air kind of rushes over these haunches here, past those vents over there, into here, and feed into the air box like that. 2 cylinder banks, it's a V8. The spoiler is not active or anything like that. It's integrated into the bodywork. So that's kind of the purpose of this here with your integrated brake light. This trim piece here is actually for your navigation or your satellite radio, which this particular car is equipped with. The Ferrari badge here, also just as complicated to install and uninstall like the prancing horse on the back. Okay, so let's hop in here. See what we have. Okay, so there's a couple of different interiors that you can get in these cars. This particular car has what they call Daytona seats. Anytime you see a Ferrari with these seats that have kind of like these grills in them, that's a Daytona seat. It's a nice touch. It's a classic thing. They've had them since Ferrari 308s. So it's something that is kind of like a nod to the past, but still looks good today. I like them. And you usually have a contrasting stitch. Okay, so this is a Chiaro beige. And the name of this interior is called Nuovo Coio. Coio is Italian for beige. Nuova means, I guess, new. I'm not sure. This car has electric adjustment on the seats and they're heated. Not all Ferraris have this. It's not a big deal because not a lot of these cars are driven in the wintertime. Why would you need the heated seats? But it's a nice feature to have. And if I was ordering one, it's definitely a box that I would tick off. You also have 3 different seat adjustments. You can program into these things or these buttons on the door. You got a button to open your frunk and you got a button to open your gas door. This car has carbon fiber trim. So that carbon fiber trim is found on the steering wheel. It's actually a really nice steering wheel. So over here where your buttons surround and just behind your airbag cover is all carbon fiber. But the coolest part about the steering wheel is the LED shift indicators. So if you are kind of like banging through the gears yourself, you're gonna see these slowly fill up with LEDs and then it's gonna blink indicating for you to shift so you don't have to keep your eyes on the revs. You just keep your eyes where you're going, which is very important. It's very simple and symmetrical in here. Very little to distract you. A lot of the information for your navigation, music, and things like that are divided amongst your 2 screens that are on each side of your tachometer. Tachometer, dead center. This particular one has a yellow tack. You can get red, you can get black. Really nice touch. This car has the yellow calipers and things like that. And when you have a yellow tack, it kind of adds a splash of color to this car because there's not a whole lot with it being gray. Steering wheel, flat bottom, a lot of interesting stuff on here. Everything designed to keep your attention in this direction and keep you focused. Your turn signals are activated through here. Your wipers are activated through here. Your washer fluid, your high beams. 2 really important things. One is this button that they have dedicated to bumpy roads. I think they probably integrated this as an OEM option because a lot of these cars are driven in Europe and they go in old cities where you have cobblestone. Makes a big difference. I thought it would drive extremely rough because of how stiff the suspension is, but they are actually very compliant and I can drive them for long periods of time without hurting my back. And this is due in part to this to the adaptive suspension. Very nice feature when you're somewhere where the road looks a bit dicey, where you can't gather much speed and you don't want to feel jarred every time you go over a bump. The most important feature on this steering wheel is what Ferrari calls Manettino. This is where you choose your different driving modes. So you have wet, sport, race, turning off your traction control and turning off your stability program. So when you put the car in different modes, it limits or exploits different elements of the car. So when you put it in wet, the car will shift very soon. It will limit torque, so you're less likely to spin the wheels. Sport is probably the most fun. It's an even keel in between race and wet. Race is obviously the most extreme one. So this changes how the car shifts gears, double clutch transmission. It also kind of like dials back a few of the driver's aids. So the more crazy you go with your Manettino switch is the more you need to be paying attention. Car's mid-engine rear-wheel drive. So if you're going in a corner or something like that, you never want to get too heavy on the throttle, otherwise the car will just spin like a top. The chassis is extremely well designed and is more than enough to handle the power, but I'm just trying to explain what it's like driving a car like this. You can't fool physics. That's all it is. You have a really nice feature down here. This piece is actually 2 cup holders, and there's a piece in here that's removable. But this piece sits in here, and it's a perfect little spot to put your Ferrari key so it's not bulging in your pocket, and also to remind you what you're driving. Climate control is pretty easy to control. Again, very symmetrical, not overcomplicated. These control switches all here help you manage what shows up on your right screen, which is typically things related to phone, music, navigation. Stuff on the left has stuff to do with the car. Fuel, lap time, speed, things like that. In your tachometer, there's a small screen there which lets you know what gear you're in. If you have the car in automatic mode and you have it in sport or race, this will change the times that the car decides to change gears and at what point they decide to hold gears or even kick gears down. So even if you're driving the car in automatic mode, which sounds like a big mistake, it's not. It's actually very intelligent and is able to anticipate what you're doing depending on how deep you are in a corner, depending on your steering feedback, like the angle of the steering, and it uses so many different parameters to decide what to do and does a really good job of making those decisions for you. When you want to have fun, all you got to do is press this auto button here on this carbon fiber central tunnel. Now you're in charge. This car was also equipped with carbon fiber shift paddles, which have a really nice feel and match the weave of the carbon fiber spread throughout the rest of the interior. This is your reverse button. As soon as you press that, the screen on the right will show what your rear view camera is showing. Also, when you get close, you can activate your front camera so you can see exactly where the curb is, so make sure you don't hit anything. You do that by pressing the camera button right here. You also have what Ferrari calls back radar, which is really just rear parking sensors. That's a nice feature. And you have your front axle lift, which is this button right here. The front axle lift is not that expensive an option. I think it's really important to have that on these cars because sometimes we'll get cars in that don't have it, and I don't understand why people don't get it. It doesn't alter the performance of the car at all, and it's a huge convenience and could save you a lot of money if you hit something. One good thing about the F8 Spider and the 488 and the 458 before that is the hardtop. That's really important. It's good for safety and most importantly, rigidity, because with the 430 and every other convertible before that, they're all rag, and that's not really good. They get damaged easily, expensive to replace. The hardtop is a worthwhile change to these cars. So we're just going to throw the top up right now. My favorite part about the hardtop convertibles on these Ferraris is the back window here. So if I just press this button, I can lower that and I can have all these windows up. And the benefit to that is that when you're romping on the engine and stuff like that, and you can hear the air induction, you can hear a bit of turbo spool and stuff like that, really helps with the engagement. And engine sounds great, even though it's turbocharged, so don't fret. Okay, so let's fire this up and see how it sounds. A cool feature is the steering column mounted shift paddles. Like, they've been doing this for a long time, and I think it's the right way to do it. McLaren does it, Lamborghini does it, because this way, at least if you're in a curve or you're in a bend or something, you're not chasing a paddle. I've driven a lot of Porsches before. I don't spend enough time on a track for it to really become a problem, but I know that I hate chasing paddles. I like them to stay in the same spot. Not only that, they're very big. So depending on where your hand is, they're easier to reach when you're going and banging through the gears, downshifting and stuff like that. When they stay in the same spot, it's easy to find the gear that you want. So like I said, 3.9 liter twin turbo V8, 710 horse. This is the air box that I was describing to you. So air is sucked in here, goes into this air box through the air filters and gets fired into here. These are your mass airflow sensors. These have like a ribbed connection here because like when you're really pushing it, like any car really, this stuff tends to vibrate with how it kind of sucks in air. So that's totally necessary. That's where your oil goes. This is where you put in your power steering fluid. The one thing that I always found really astonishing about these cars is how low this V8 is situated. Like everything you see on top here is not actually where the block is, it's actually down there. Like standing up, it's probably where my knee is. The lower the engine, the lower the center of gravity. A car like this, dry sump lubrication, no need for an oil pan, it lets the engine sit lower. It's extremely low. So if you wanted one of the latest and greatest Ferrari V8s, this would be the car to have. Thanks for watching. I'm Nima from MVL Leasing. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.